Hey everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. Sitting with my friend J.J.Blair. How are you?
Great to see you, buddy.
We've been hanging out a little bit today. We've had a bit of fun. We've been recording a drum recording course. And I particularly love your studio. I think, firstly, it sounds fantastic and the gear's amazing. But the drum room itself is pretty comparable to, I don't know, a bedroom size.
Yeah, because it used to be a bedroom. That was fun. It's a coincidence, isn't it?
It is a great coincidence, as they say. So this is going to be a fun course because, of course, we'll be able to talk about how you can record drums in a relatively normal size room, not a cavernous one. So
Right.
It was a lot of fun to do. But what I want to talk to you about today, and we did this with Reed, who we both know very well, is the reason why you do this. What inspires you? Now, this is a very open-ended question. It could be people, like engineers, producers. It could be records, could be songs, it could be gear. I just know when somebody asked me that question.
So why do I record? Why
do you just do this? Why do you do what you do? Because
Oh,
you play, you write, you record, what inspired you to start this?
I love
wonderful journey?
records.
Okay, good.
This is a musical instrument. I'm sitting in a musical instrument, and it's part of This is where the art and the technology come together. There are things that you can do in a studio. You can't. The Beatles couldn't just go out and perform Sgt. Pepper. Like once they made the record, maybe you can hire a bunch of people and go recreate it. But the studio becomes an instrument, and it's just always turned me on since I had my dad's reel-to-reel and realized I could play things backwards and edit tape and whatnot. And I just love it. I love music, and I love recorded music. I love the process of it. And once you get to do it, the drug is you come in with a nebulous idea. You're like, okay, I have a song, and I think this is going to be, maybe it's going to work like this. And sometimes when you get the right group of people together and they land on that thing, and that idea becomes a reality, and it's even better than you imagined it. And that for me is the drug. Like that's the high I keep chasing when it's just like, okay, let's try this. I'm going to throw this against the wall. Oh my God, it's stuck. And it's fantastic. And it's great. And then other people hear it and they're excited by it and they love it. And you're like, yeah, I made that. That's cool,
Fantastic.
And yeah, that's the high I try to chase. And when on the rare instances when I get the opportunity, and it's not just like, I'll do whatever for money.
What is that?
That is the object from the Led Zeppelin Presence record.
Oh.
And somebody on Etsy makes 3D printed models of them, and they look really janky. They have all the serrations and everything. And as you know, I refinish guitars and finish guitars, and I'm rather handy in that way. And so I just made it look nice through a bunch of elbow grease and
lovely
hard work, and being a big Led Zeppelin fan, particularly of that record, Presence might be my favorite Zeppelin record.
It's a wonderful record.
Yeah, and then like mixed in a day or something. By the way,
well, recorded the way they wanted to hear.
Yes.
So probably the mixing was probably like.
I think there was a real lack of sleep and probably some Peruvian marching powder involved. They had a
can't imagine what you mean.
Timeline. Yeah, something like that.
So there's a record that inspires Presence.
Yes. Presence is kind of the antithesis of what a lot of people think about when they think about a studio recording. It's kind of the opposite of, say, a Steely Dan record, which people think about like, oh, recording studio, like Steely Dan, that's what you want to do. And Presence is one of those records that manages to keep a very raw, live vibe where all that energy is still there and it's still a little bit dangerous. And those are, I like to make both kind of records. I like to make the very slick Steely Dan sounding stuff, and then I like to do, Led Zeppelin 1 or something. I mean, I'm making a record right now that we are trying to get live vocal performance and have everything be a keeper. Like that's the one, no overdubs. And amazingly, our first takes have been the keepers, but there's just certain types of music that are better when it's raw and it's natural, and that's always exciting.
It's interesting you should touch on that idea of understanding lots of different ways to make music. We just did a video, strangely enough, coincidentally enough, with Reed, and he was mixing a song and using a ton of plugins, and somebody made a comment about the performance, and I'm like, yeah, but you do remember last week I put a video up with Reed going live to vinyl. You know what I mean? It's like
which takes pulse. I want to tell you a great story, by the way, as told to me by Lee Sklar. He was doing a record. This is one of those name drop stories that's fantastic. That has to wind up out there. Lee Sklar was telling me he was doing a Bill Schnee direct to vinyl recording. So you have to play down the entire side live to vinyl, and they were one cut away or from the final cut of that side, and the door opens. And Jaco Pastorius jumps in and goes, "Hey, cats, what's going on?" And so they had to go back and recut the whole album side because Jaco, who was out of his mind, came in and decided to mess up their take.
So what are the albums? What are the ones that you constantly go back to that inspire you?
And I don't know why this is jumping out of my brain. There's something about Yes, Close to the Edge.
I love that.
It's just so. There's just something about it. It's recorded so beautifully and musically, and there's a lot going on, and everybody's completely overplaying and doing, but in the most genius way, and everything sits perfectly. I don't know why that just jumped out of my head right now, but there's just. I drive back and forth to Mammoth a lot, and I like to do it by myself because I like to play the same song over and over and over and really get into it. And for some reason, that's a record that I will just get into over and over.
Strange you say that the album for me that I listen to over and over again is the Yes album.
Yeah,
especially when it gets Perpetual Motion.
Yeah,
and the band breaks into two bands and goes left to right. And then these two different grooves are playing at the same time, and then they come back, and then it just goes to pure melody and vocals. I think they just hit it on all levels, don't they? Because they could write pop songs, and they could also play their asses off.
Exactly, and they could be very smart. And it's funny because side one of Close to the Edge, it took me years to penetrate that. I couldn't. I got side two right away, but side one I just couldn't get for years. And then one day it was just too above my head. It was a little too weird, and then I got it. And then it's like, oh my God, this is the the best prog music ever, which is like saying, the leper with most fingers or something. But it really takes a special person to appreciate prog. But
I'm kind of obsessed with it. So it's prog for me is like hits on all levels for me because I grew up on classical music, and then I got into Queen when Queen were more of a prog band, quite frankly. Right. And so for me, it's sort of.
I mean, before Radio Gaga.
Before Radio Gaga, which I love too. But it's like a guilty secret,
Yeah.
Brian McLeod and I were talking about doing a prog band. We should do a prog band.
Well, he's. I know he's a very big Mahavishnu fan.
Yes.
And ask him his Gene Simmons story sometimes.
I will.
Yeah.
I will. I got to get him on camera.
I love that guy.
Yeah.
One of the and such a great song drummer.
Mm-hmm.
That he was one of the first drummers that I noticed, like, oh, his right foot is listening to the vocal. This is really interesting. Brilliant guy, sweetheart too.
I also remember the first time I ever recorded with him was with Don Smith, and he came into the control room. It was at Don's studio in Agora, and we played the track, and I was playing bass with him,
Mhm.
so this really was a great experience. Played him the track, played him the demo, and he's like, "Oh, this is cool. Yeah, okay." So we went back in, and the first take we played, we all just stopped and we're like, "How did he do that?"
Yeah.
It was absolutely phenomenal. We came back and listened, and we're like, "That's the take."
And since we're talking about recording drums, he's one of those guys who, he gets in there, and this is the difference between session guys and everyone else. He hits a drum and he will make it sound better. Like he really has a sound. So do most great players, but he's just one of those guys. The way he has a touch translates in the studio so well. It's always just sort of perfect. I never have to go, hey, can you like back off a little bit of this there?
But one thing I do like about session drummers, which I think is very important, the best guys, the best session drummers sound like they've been playing in the band for 5 years before they went in and recorded.
Yeah.
I think there's this sort of perception, especially in an online world where everything's all about the technique. Look at this guy playing and this guy. It's like, that's great. But when you hire these guys, they come in, they do 2 or 3 takes, maybe the 3rd or 4th take, you listen back and you're like, yeah, it sounds like you guys have been touring for 5 years and just walks in the record.
Well, because guys who play in studios for a living, typically they play the drums. They play the song. They don't play the drums.
Yeah.
And that's, when there's too many guys who they're playing their instrument. They're not playing the song. And always what we're doing on this side of the glass and what they're doing on their side of the glass should always be about serving the song. That's always the underlying thing.
Absolutely. All right. So Close to the Edge.
Yeah. So
what else?
We're
going to make a Spotify playlist.
I'm gearing up for the Who coming to town, and I'm going through my. I just always have to go back to Quadrophenia, which to me is the musical equivalent of Catcher in the Rye. There's just something that that album translates teen outsider angst in a way that it just means so much to me, and I feel like every lyric of it. And then if you're going out of the studio, what I think is the greatest live album of all time, which is Live at Leeds, which just makes me so excited.
Yeah,
it's just perfection, and it sounds fantastic. And if you have the release where it's the entire show where they play all of Tommy live, it's everything I wish rock and roll still could be. but no one will. Yeah. No one has the balls to do it like that, where you're really out on a limb, and it's just what people used to do then to get good. And the way you would have to do shows and shows and shows and shows. Bands were just different in terms of their skill and the way they worked as an organism, because you have to go play a club for 5 nights a week or something like that, and the way that people would shed back then, they don't have to now, so they don't. I'm not hearing it in, it's not that in my day it was better. It's not that thing. It's just, it's a different thing. People don't have to put in the type of hours and blood, sweat, and tears. If you're going to go play the Whiskey for your 25-minute set once every month, it's not the same.
Pay to play.
Yeah, and it's not the same thing as you're going to go, play 5 nights, 3 hours for 5 nights a week at the Red Onion somewhere. It's just a different thing. You're gonna be, where you have to learn other people's material too, which always makes you a better musician than just, I'm gonna play what I wrote.
Right, absolutely. So the Who, Quadrophenia.
Yeah. You introduced me to Graham Coxon.
Mm-hmm.
Those records, the Blur records, I just love. It's just that was like them and Supergrass and Radiohead. Those were people who were really having fun in the studio in the 90s and trying to make really cool records.
Oh yeah, for us in England, Modern Life is Rubbish was like,
yeah.
Ah!
Yeah, yeah.
It was like it made it okay.
Yeah, I used to just put on oily water and go, listen to that bass sound. Listen to that bass sound.
Yeah.
So
Guitar, the guitar effects on
oh yeah,
Chemical World.
yeah, all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I don't know what else I listen to. I listen to a lot of country lately, hence the shirt. Because you know, and because I play, for me, that's like what I like to play, so I don't get bored on guitar. Because I can add a lot of weird chromatic bebop stuff, and it works in the genre. Like it would still, you don't leave that. You can play like some bebop type stuff, and you don't leave the country idiom because it really goes hand in hand. I can't play that if I'm playing rock. It's just like what do you do? What are you doing? It's not, you know, I can't throw those licks in on tumbling dice or something.
Right.
Without, you know, I wouldn't want to either. But
Any particular country that's really inspirational, something that stands head and shoulders above everything else?
I mean, I'm on a real Merle Haggard kick right now. I just insisted on us recording one of his songs on this record we're doing, but I wanted to do it. It's like, okay, what if Ray Charles had done this on New Directions, and so we did it, and we wound up doing it in 6/8 with a little bit of a little, you know, twist on some of the chords, because I'm like you know, it's song called "Sing Me Back Home," which is it's a death row song. You know, it's like and just Merle's recording is a little too happy, but it's such a deep song, and so it's like, let's do this like it's really, you know, like feeling it. And it's a record I'm making with Mike Finnegan, who is, aside from being one of the finest B3 players alive, is such an outstanding vocalist, and so him, like he puts you there. You're in the moment. You're like you're on death row with the guy, and that's the thing I love about country music. Aside from the twang, it's you know, stories.
Absolutely.
About drinking and cheating
and going to jail.
Going to jail.
And being on death row.
Being on death row.
So what? Okay, here's a good. What is the first rock, or what's the first? It could be pop, could be anything. What's the first record that you remember where you were like, "Wow, what is this?"
Probably the Beatles, the Red and Blue compilations. I immediately had to, you know, I was like, okay, I was a kid. I heard, I was obsessed from the beginning.
So your parents had those albums?
My sister, who's 10 years older than I am, I borrowed hers, and I played it on my crappy little General Electric phonograph, and she got mad, and so we had to go buy her new ones that weren't ruined by my crappy needle, because these were things that, you know, and I got to pick out my first record ever that wasn't like Snoopy versus the Red Baron or something.
What was that?
It was Rubber Soul.
Nice.
And that was it. I was off. I was hooked.
Rubber Soul is a great gateway drug because it's a little bit experimental, but all the songs are about 2 minutes 30.
Right.
So they're like super pop, but at the same time cool and experimental.
But they're rock, you know, that's kind of like where they're rocking out a little bit with those dominant 7 on the backbeat things, like the word. So they're starting to get into that, you know, sort of that territory, and it's not, they're moving away from I want to hold your hand into it's that's the gateway towards the White Album.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And the songwriting is just marvelous, and yeah, and then the other thing that's really, I've gotten to become friends with Davy Johnston, and the first time I met him, like, I need to tell you, you are the reason I play guitar, because my sister would put on Elton's greatest hits, and every time Saturday nights, All Right for Fighting would come on, I would grab a tennis racket and jump around. I'm like, that's the sound. I want to make that sound, whatever that is. And that was the sound that obsessed me with, and I asked him, I said, how did you get that sound, by the way?
How?
He said what he described sounded like a 68 or 69 Gold Top Les Paul. He said there was one Marshall stack, something like 2 or 3 AC30s and 10 Fender Princetons. That's what he told me. and that was the sound. And
Wow. I mean,
it was
all individually mic'd or just cranked in a room
well,
with a big
that
mic on?
part I don't know, but it was like the amalgamation of everything, and it
Wow.
was teeth rattling.
Wow.
That's like,
Yeah, I wonder how it's mic'd. It sounds like, my guess is it's all cranking in one room.
yeah, probably.
And there's like a mic or several mics, but not individually mic'd.
Yeah, it's one of those things like I have to go back and give it another. I have to put the,
I mean, it's
the
aggressive.
ear
That
on
yeah, I mean, it's aggressive without being metal.
Right.
So it does point to a lot of energy.
Yeah. And again, smaller amps, which is, I don't know if we talked about this in our last interview, but my experience in the studio is that I can get smaller amps to sound bigger because I'm not overpowering the room. I'm not overpowering the mic. Number of things, like I can allow the air to move a little bit, and
Sure.
and I can get some texture out of them that if I'm going through like a diesel or something, it's just I've lost it in the first gain stage.
Right. Well, Dave Jordan and Brian Karlstrom, when I worked with them in the 90s, we used to use like 8 and 10-inch speakers and front and back mic and flip the polarity on the back one and get massive guitar sounds.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I'd ever experienced that. I was like, oh, wow. My Pro Junior just sounds like a wall of guitars.
Yeah. Yeah. And, well, it's about, I talked about how this is, impressionism. It's about perception. We'll go back to Zeppelin. I remember in the 90s, everyone trying to get some friends I was working with. They really wanted to get that Bonham sound. They wanted that big bass sound to the point where they were speeding the tape machine fast and recording the song a couple clicks fast so that they could then play back at regular speed, and the formant of the drum would change and be bigger. And it's like, I'm like, well, no, if I'm listening to Zeppelin, there really isn't any low end there. I'm just perceiving low end.
Sure.
I'm perceiving low end because they left space around the drums, and you can hear the room, and I can hear that it's tuned, but there's nothing under 200 hertz going on there that I can tell on that bass drum.
Right. Right.
And so that's that. Again, it's impressionism. It's like,
sure. Yeah, you go back and listen to Van Halen 1 and 2. The kicks are like the 57s on the kick drums.
Yeah.
So. Plus, of course, we were talking about this off camera. Mastering engineers were sort of forced to wipe off all the super lows anyway, just to fit it properly onto vinyl,
Yeah.
And then we were hoping that the RIAA curve was going to pick up the top and the low lows.
And I don't know when the. I just recently learned about the computer that looks ahead and knows how to space it, but I don't know when that was introduced. But something tells me they didn't have it in 60s or 70s.
No, probably.
So you had to, you had to be even more conservative with
Sure.
the room that you could work with when it knew how deep to cut it or how to space the next track.
So we've done some Zeppelin, we've done some country, we've done some, of course, Yes. Anything current-ish, like even last 10 years that you?
Yeah, it's so funny.
I will Blur as well. So.
I will hear something. I'll hear like a song. I'll be somewhere and I'll hear a song. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I don't want to say the names of these bands because I don't want to throw them under the bus. But I'll go, oh, that's, and I'll Shazam it. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I go, I buy records. By the way, if you love music, just if it's a song you like, pay $1.29 on iTunes. Don't Spotify. It's just, don't rip off the artist. So I will.
I think iTunes is going. In the latest version of OX, it's not going to be there.
No, the store will be there. It's going to be called Music.
But you can still be able to buy it.
I believe you are. Yeah.
Okay, but I do think they're abandoning carrying.
Well, we'll figure this part out. But however, find a way to pay for music. So sure. I'll do that now. And I'll
definitely, if you're on Spotify, pay for it. Don't use the free version.
But if you really want the artist to get the money, buy the song. Don't buy Spotify. That's what I'm saying. If you love someone, buy their actual record. So I'll hear something somewhere and I'll go like, oh, that's cool. I'll go buy that record, and I'll buy the record because it's the price of 2 lattes. And then I get it and I'm like, yeah, I'm not feeling it. And so I keep trying to get into new music, and I'll listen and I'll go like, oh, that's, no, it's not quite where I thought it was. And I don't want to mention the bands because I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. And who knows, maybe they'll hire me and I don't want to talk shit about them. But it's, I'm not great about, because when I'm driving around, I'm either listening to the news so that I can just walk around depressed all the time, or I'm listening to comfort food,
Right.
and I want to hear, I feel like I'm too busy discovering old music that somehow passed me by on deep cuts and trying to make the best of the shitty sound on Sirius XM. I'm awful at jumping into new music. And why? Because where do people discover new music? Spotify, and I don't use Spotify.
Right.
So I'm usually when I'm somewhere and they're playing Spotify, and I'll and then something that I think is new, it's like, oh, this has been out for 10 years. Okay, I'm just not with it.
Well, I suppose it's also different because a lot of the bands that we consider to be the classic great bands were putting out 1 or 2 albums a year.
Yeah.
And, since the 90s, it's like 1 to every 2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
So a band can be fairly new if they're 8 years old because there might only be 2 albums into their career. It's quite scary, really.
Yeah. And it's, and in terms of what's being released right now, the signal to noise ratio is lousy. A lot of noise to,
Right.
quality signal. So
I always say
you have to sort through a lot of chicken shit to get to the chicken salad.
Well, I feel like you're probably right, Sis. I feel like there's a lot of like good, even some really good, and not much great. It just feels like I don't, there was something so horribly wrong with the old system of gatekeepers and stuff, but there was also something beautiful about it, where it was pretty much, at least pre sort of mid-90s, where the cream rose to the top. I think the 90s was a different time because I felt like when I first started, especially in America, I felt like it was the A&R guys decided who was going to be successful. They found people and sort of like put money behind it. But I think up until that point, bands, artists toured, started building followings, and then they were signed.
And no matter how many articles Don Henley wrote bashing the label system, here's another perspective. They're going to give you $1.5 million loan to make a record, promote, tour, and do everything, and you're not going to have to pay it back. It's a pretty good deal unless you're successful. The deal only sucks if you're successful.
Right.
Okay. But if you're a failure, it's a great deal. And very few people look at it that way, and there's something, there's something to be said for whether or not that was valuable, but and whether these people knew what they were doing or took great art and turned it into crap by trying to make it commercially successful. But it was, it had a good point if you were a musician trying to, and you could make it past the gate. As much as we loved bashing on it back when it was paying everybody.
Yep, absolutely. Any other records you just feel like?
Here's something we've never talked about. I'm going to digress for a minute. And I have a friend who's that I've been working with, doing some records with, who's successful and a well-known guitarist. But he says, like, hey, there's a lot of guitar players that can play circles around me, but can they put on an act? Can they do these other things? So it's not just about, if you're a guitarist and you want people to know you, what do Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, Eddie Van Halen, what do they all have in common?
Quite a few things, actually. I mean, they're all great performers, they're great songwriters, great riff writers.
They're great songwriters. Yeah. How many great guitarists have we never heard of because they wrote songs that nobody cared about?
Sure.
And that's and it always, for me, it always comes down to the songwriting. It doesn't matter, how fast you can play scales or how great you can solo. If you want people to take notice of you and you want to make a mark, either you become a great songwriter or you find a great songwriter to give you songs.
Sure.
And because it's the songs that endure always. But it's, I was just noticing after having that discussion with my friend the other day, it's just like, yeah, I think if anything, it boils down to the songs. If you want to stand out from everybody else,
sure,
have great songs, and then try not to suck when you perform them.
Right. Yeah, that is a very valuable asset to be a great songwriter. JJ, thank
Always
you
a
ever so
pleasure,
much.
my friend.
Always a pleasure to talk to you as well. As ever, please leave any comments and questions below. You actually got into answering some before.
I do. I'm addicted to my devices and the internet, and to procrastinate from working on stuff I don't want to have to do. So I will probably be checking. And
marvelous. And we will also link to the studio tour previous interview.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we did not bring the dog out today, but you can see her in the studio tour.
Marvelous. All right. Thank you ever so much.
Thanks, buddy.